So good day, everyone, and again, welcome to the first listening circle of the year. My name is Pedro Torres. I am the National Tribal Liaison for NRCS, and I just wanted to make some kind of opening comments before we get moving on to our agenda. One, to point out, to thank the American Indian Alaska Native Employee Association that kind of sponsors these regular gatherings, and thank the cadre. We are a cadre of NRCS employees from representing all the different regions who, this started during COVID. We felt like we really needed a regular forum to talk about tribal things, strategies for better working with tribes, issues that are specific in Indian country, and kind of share those. It is really great to see this many people coming and joining us now in I think it's our third year of doing these. Couple of things I wanted folks to keep an eye out for. We do have pretty soon there'll be the request for proposals for conservation innovation grants. Last year there was a category under conservation innovation grants, especially for tribal traditional knowledge, and it's expected that something akin to that will come about. Will come through this year's conservation innovation grants as well. So again, keeping an eye out for those and keeping the tribes you work with aware, of those opportunities. There were some really great proposals under that category for CIG last year that really focused on tribal traditional practices and tribal land management practices and how they can better inform NRCS processes. And again, this year under our RCPP, there is a $10 million set aside for tribes and tribal projects. Of course, Seth will be talking a little bit more about that later on. But again, I want you all to be thinking about folks that might be interested in these. We are hoping to do a tribal specific listening session in May. And so keep an eye out for that and help spread the word for that so that we get folks there and listening. And then the last plug is just to say kind of for our next session will be June 10th, same time. If you were at this one, you will receive a meeting invite for the next one. And we will be focusing on tribal historic preservation officers. And so now I would like to welcome Cassius Spears back up to facilitate this session. And again, thank you all for joining us.
All right, thank you, Pedro. Thank you for hosting this, and I know you're a busy man, and thank you for all the work that you do in Indian country, starting out in this new position as a National Tribal Liaison. I just want to say, just for those that don't know me, my name is Cassius Spears. I'm the State Resource Conservationist in Rhode Island. Like I said in my opening words, I'm from the Narragansett Indian tribe. Today we're here to talk about the AFAs, and we have a slate of presenters who are actively in some stage working through the AFA process. And without further ado, let me get right to them, because that's why you all are here. So, and I'm going to be honest with you, I'm still learning myself when it comes to AFAs and what the potential in them when working with federally recognized tribes. So with that, I'm going to see who we have here. I'm going to go right down the list. And we're going to start out with Colorado NRCS. And do we have Elizabeth With and Ed McCaw on the line? All right, we have Ed. Great. So I'm going to have Ed, I'm going to have you do your first presentation, and he's going to talk about Colorado's NRCS working on a RCPP AFA with their tribe.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. A little correction there. We're doing a CSP AFA, not an RCPP AFA. So just a little bit of a correction there. And I've got a little bit of a slideshow if I can share the screen. Would that be appropriate?
Please feel free.
Let me know when you can see that.
Looking good, Ed.
Okay, so our range health, we call this the Range Health and Resiliency Project. It's a conservation stewardship program, an alternative funding arrangement that we started in January with a very short time frame. So I'll give you a little background on how this all came about. It's all about kind of building the relationship, right? Relationship with our tribal partners takes time, takes trust, and takes communication. I've been tribal liaison here in Colorado for the past 15 years, and I'm also now the resource team lead for our team. But we've completed multiple equip projects and a variety of resource concerns with the tribe. So take you to our vision when we started talking about this. We wanted to take the tribal conservation to a new level with CSP, build buy-in with tribal partners, and then also understand the barriers to participating in these programs with the tribes. You all know with CSP that through the program language, it says that participants need to sign up all of their land within CSP, and that's just not doable for most tribes, especially the big tribes out west. So we thought about how we could make this work. At the IAC conference in December, I had a chance to sit down with Branch Chief Mike Witt and discuss options that we could use to that we had in not enrolling the entire tribal land base, but just a portion of it. And the management, Mike and I talked about what could be done, and if the management, funding, and operations can be shown to be significantly different from other operations, then a CSP can be developed for tribal projects. So that was a really positive step for us moving forward. So once we got back, we took that to our state leadership team and outlined AFA options. They're laid out in the Farm Bill. A lot of people think an AFA is an AFA, but it is not. So AFAs for tribal projects are a lot like a BIA 632 project where they give the money and the tribe does the work. We looked at it and approached it in more of this manner than the typical, like an RCPP AFA, where you have a sponsor and all that type stuff. So a little caution there is that a lot of people don't understand the differences between AFAs, and that is really important to do. Like I say, we took this to the state leadership team. Our state conservationist, Clint Evans, agreed to give this a shot. So he tasked Liz With, who is our assistant state conservationist for partnerships, and myself to develop the AFA with the tribe. But it's also on a very short timeline. This is the 1st of January, and I believe we have to have this, if it's going to go this year, it has to be obligated by the 1st of June. So we have it's basically a 6-month time frame to develop this partnership agreement, get everything, do all the negotiation, have our meetings, have everything signed. It's a very short time frame. So when we did this, the first person we contacted was Kyle Tackett out of Montana. I think maybe my slide messed up here, so let me back up just this one here. Anyway, Kyle Tackett provided us a lot of really good insight. They're doing an EQIP AFA in Montana. He gave us a lot of tips, ideas, some lessons learned, and we told him that we were looking at a CSP AFA instead of EQIP. He has focused primarily on projects as opposed to the conservation stewardship as we had proposed it. So, like I say, we got a lot of good information from him. We went back. Liz With, again, she's just incredible. She drafted the programmatic agreement using a template that we received. We reviewed, re-edited, and when we were getting what we thought were close, we asked Alana Cohen from National Headquarters. She was very gracious, and she's a delightful person that has provided immense knowledge for us. She joined our team and has been reviewing our work ever since. We provide questions to her. I believe she reports direct to Mike Witt, and so if there's questions, it goes right to the top. We get answers immediately. If you're looking at one of these things, she's a very good contact. Liz and I also met in person with the Tribal Department of Natural Resources. And I will say that in-person meetings are very important when you're talking about these. This is a negotiated process, and having in-person meetings is essential. One of the tips that Kyle had given us about in-person meetings was that when we do this, we have fewer NRCS staff in the room than we have tribal staff or tribal interests. We're not there to overpower the meeting. We're there to negotiate. We're there to understand their needs and their wants and what is going to work well for them. So with that, there are, like I say, there's a couple different ways you can go. You can do the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, EQIP, everybody knows about that, but the Conservation Stewardship Program, this is a little bit new to the tribes. And so you kind of need to envision a project that will address a needed resource concern that's important to the tribe and select the appropriate route, whether it's in environmental quality incentives or the conservation stewardship. One of the things that we wanted to do with this project is give the tribes ownership of the process and the results. We want to use tribal staff for assessments. We want to use tribal staff for implementation. We want to use tribal staff for reporting. You kind of get the general idea there of how important it is that we use tribal staff. This should be something that is for the tribe, by the tribe, and that's how we've kind of approached this. The only thing that we are requiring is that they meet our standard specifications and requirements under the CSP program. So everything else, it's a tribal-led venture. The tribe has provided all the mapping and GIS data. They provide data collection for assessments. They provide the planning, implementation, and addressing additional resource concerns that will be expected at the end of this process. Give you a little background here. So stewardship threshold, everybody knows that we're looking at addressing stewardship thresholds. And if we're below, we may be looking at an EQIP conservation project. And if we're above, then it's there we are with conservation stewardship. Like I say, it's not a typical CSP. In this case, we're only looking at meeting minimum threshold requirements. That being, there's 2 resource concerns to be met on each tribal, on each land use. And the only land use that we're identifying is rangeland. So we're doing the assessment totally based on rangeland. And we're getting all the rangeland assessment data from the tribal's rangeland management staff. They're providing the range health assessments, which are then sent to our state rangeland specialist, and she does the assessments and determines if they meet threshold or not. Again, like I say, there's the historic financial assistance. The 2018 Farm Bill provides a lot of really good language as far as what's available and how it can be used. There's a lot of flexibility, and flexibility is key in this process. Flexibility in the agreement. This is a negotiated agreement that both the tribe and the NRCS have a say in. And so that can't be emphasized enough. Flexibility with leadership. How will you fund this endeavor? Is it going to come through state FA and TA dollars, or are you going to do a special request to the national headquarters for tribal specific funding? Both are options, and yeah, that's something that we need to consider. Flexibility with our time and planning for face-to-face meetings. When tribal council, most tribal councils are very busy. When they have an opportunity to meet with us, we need to take every advantage of that opportunity. So our time needs to be flexible to meet their timelines. Just a little background. We use the authority under the 2018 Farm Bill, and also the authority within the alternative funding arrangement, and the authority given to the state conservationist to allow us to do this. The Conservation Stewardship Program, again, is we're using this to address the rangeland noxious weeds, and maintain the high level of rangeland monitoring and management. The photos you see are of rangeland, of the actual rangeland that we're doing assessments on. So you can kind of see the improvement that we've been working with. This is a 5-year agreement, as all CSPs are, and we're doing annual payments. One of the things to remember with annual payments to the tribe is there are no payment limitations with CSP and the tribe. Basic eligibility requirements. We want to really keep it simple. We addressed two threshold requirements, 2 resource concerns, and address the third that is important to the tribe, which is the control of noxious weeds. Those were kind of our basic eligibility requirements. We also have requirements for FSA, and but we've been working with the tribe for a long time, and so that it was not as big of an issue. Number 2, responsibilities of the parties. Agreement development. Who was going to do that? NRCS took that role. Initial and long-term implementation, that was left up to the tribes to decide what works best for the tribes. What are we going to do? How big of areas are we going to do? Deliverables, that's also a negotiated item. What do you want to see? It's got to meet our standards and specifications. Like I said, we've got to maintain those thresholds and deliver on the expectations at the end of 5 years. How are we going to do that? And then the attachment and details, and these are, I'll get into these a little bit later. So, so for the stewardship thresholds, we're looking to meet at least 2 priority resource concerns, like I say, at the time of application. When we did this, we took the tribe's data, we assessed livestock production limitations and plant productivity and health. And then we also wanted to address the plant pressure or the weeds by implementing herbaceous weed control. The responsibilities of the parties for the initial assessment and an initial eligibility assessment is that we're going to provide the financial and technical assistance for this program, and the NRCS is going to assess the project stewardship thresholds. These are the tribe's responsibilities. They're going to work through FSA to establish records. They're going to enroll all the land that's range land or under the range division control within the contract for the 5 years. Be compliant with all of NRCS wetlands, all the different compliant requirements that we have. Have an unique well, it's an EIN number, a tax identification number for the tribe. But we're looking at, you can see right here, 124,000 acres is being enrolled in CSP through this project. So it's not an insignificant amount of land. But a few more responsibilities. We're going to work together on developing this stewardship plan. It's got to be a win-win for both of us. And one thing that I didn't mention is that when Clint came to us, he said, this cannot fail. This has to be a win-win. It's not going to be something that we gave it a good try, but sorry, it didn't work out. This is a no-fail option. So we've approached both the tribe and us with that in mind. Tribe is going to maintain the existing conservation activities as were outlined, and they're also going to implement the herbaceous weed control on up to 1,000 acres per year, and that's all negotiated. NRCS is going to review practice requirements, and then we're going to do compliance checks, or basically these are quality assurance checks. They could be quarterly, they could be annually, they could be semi-annually. It's kind of really up to you and the negotiation on how we do all this. The NRCS is going to do the NEPA compliance through our CPA 52 process. We're going to follow all the National Historic Preservation Act and utilize our THPOs for consultation for this. Our state biologists are going to work with tribal biologists to ensure that we're not affecting endangered species or tribal species of concern. And then look at higher littoral land and wetland conservation requirements as well. So the tribe, in implementing these agreements, they're going to collect range data on every field every year that's going to be mapped for, like I say, each pasture every year. We're talking a lot of inventory points, and they've been doing this for the past 10 years. So this wasn't something that was new to them. It's something they're already doing. And then we use that data along with the data they collect throughout the year. They collect data on a preseason grazing basis, mid-season, and postseason, and then they adjust their grazing based on those documentations. And that's something that we've agreed that is going to be in the report to us, is how they adjust those and how they're being successful in maintaining that. So mapping of invasive species. They're looking at some very innovative ways of mapping species. Drone technology, for instance, has been thrown about. So that's kind of a new and unique tool that will be totally up to the tribe to figure out how to do that. And then records all across the operations for everything that we listed above. So brings us to our attachments so this is basically the nuts and bolts of the agreement. The project area maps. These are maps that were put together by the tribal GIS and mapping division. The NRCS is accepting these maps and the formats that come with them. So We have tribal seals. It's not your typical conservation plan map. It is totally tailored toward this project and the tribal needs and wants. Attachment B is the table of deliverables. So this is how we intend to provide the incentive payments. And we're following the 1155 format. And that's the format, that's the schedule of items format that is, it's very easy to understand that the tribes are, our tribe has been used to that through EQIP. And so they're very familiar with it. And so that was the format that we used for that. Reporting requirements that's a big one. So reporting requirements are a little bit different in this. Reporting requirements are all left up to the state conservationist on how he reports this. These activities are not planned in Conservation Desktop. They're not put into ProTrax or any of our typical contract mechanisms. It's a totally separate animal that we're dealing with. So and so is the reporting requirements. It's not a standard reporting, and that's all left up, like I say, to the conservation, to the state conservationist. Privacy and confidentiality. So this is a big one. You probably have recognized that I have not said the name of the tribe that I'm working with. This is because we are trying to respect their privacy and sovereignty. We're through the negotiation stage. This has been one of the, I would say this is one of our bigger negotiated items. NRCS and USDA has stuff that we have to do. The tribe has stuff that they would like to see. And so this is a really big one. We've gone back and forth with the tribe's legal team, and I think we finally have gotten to a point where we can move forward with this. So really big one there. Keep that in mind. When you're dealing with tribal sovereignty, it's a really big issue that needs to be respected. The programmatic agreement form, this is all, like I say, tied into this whole programmatic agreement. So attachment G is our NRCS standards specification and implementation requirements. This needs to be explained how we're going to address this, how we're going to measure this, and what our expectations are. Again, there has been and will continue to be a lot of meetings about what we expect and what we want to see, and how we can make this work. This is something that is not really negotiable. This has to be implemented to meet our standards specifications for us to move forward with incentive payments. The stewardship threshold report, this will go in there. Like you say, this is all being done by it's NRCS staff at our state office level. It's not, there's nothing being done but at the field office level. It's all state. And so this was a requirement that our state conservationist, he said, I want everything above ground. I want everything coming up to the state office for review. That was laid out well ahead of time. The eligibility information, we're looking at the Farm Services Agency has to develop farm and tracts for each one of these land units and range assignments. We look at acreages for these. Tribal acreages and FSA acreages need to match because we use FSA acreages for our calculations. If they don't match, we need to go back and forth and figure out why they don't and where we can come up with a negotiated agreement on that as well. So the tribes are as a whole are exempt from like AGI 1026s, 902s. All those bases need to be covered with FSA as you're going into this. It's a lot of work on FSA, and so prep them ahead of time is what I would suggest. And then who is responsible for what? As far as the tribal contacts, what we've chosen to do was we're using titles instead of name specific contacts in this agreement. If something changes, if we have a tribal council election and the chairman changes, or our range management specialist takes a different job, we want to know who on this tribal contact list is going to be the contact. So we, like I say, chose by title instead of by name. So that kind of wraps up the presentation. I'd entertain any questions if you had any.
Thank you, Ed. Is there any questions? You think of one, feel free to throw it in the chat, and we'll try to address it while we're going as well. Thank you, Ed. That was very thorough, great presentation. And one of the key takeaways that I heard from that was about tribal sovereignty and in really ensuring that decisions about tribes are made with tribes, especially when in regards to their land, their property, and their citizens. And it sounds like you all are really working through that process in a good way. So it's always good to hear. If there's no questions, we can move on to our next presenter.
Cassis, you do have a question in the chat.
Oh, do we? Oh, thank you. Let's see here. What are the advantages of running it through CSP AFA versus just CSP?
So I think the main advantage there is that the tribes are in control with an AFA where conservation stewardship, it doesn't offer the same flexibility as far as breaking out land units, doing the assessments. It's more of a NRCS led process than a tribal led process. We wanted to use the tribal. We wanted to use tribal employees, tribal staff to do all the work that they're already doing. We saw that was a great advantage to the tribe, and it provides ownership to the tribe as far as here's the data that we're providing, here's why we're collecting the data. It just made sense for us to do it that way. So hope that kind of answered your question there.
Thank you, Ed. Yeah, and I'll add on to that too and say that the Ride Tribe's push for this language dealing with AFAs is truly to to acknowledge the tribes as a government, as a sovereign, and really for self-determinations, for them to be able to have the ability to manage their own and support their own. And so I think in some ways you may, depending on the tribes, they may want to take over those responsibilities as much as they can in order to support their tribal sovereignty. So it's in some ways it's not just of application. There's of just there's other reasons behind it that tribes in an effort to self-contain would want to take on these programs through an AFA type structure. Okay, looks like we got some more questions here. If the tribe does all the TA, does National have a recommended TA percentage to pay the tribe?
So I'll try to answer that. You can use TA funds or you can use FA funds. We chose to use totally FA funds for this. TA funds are more for the administrative part of it, as opposed to the implementation of this. And so, and I hope I'm getting that right as far as the funding goes, unless you're talking about technical assistance. Technical assistance. The NRCS is still providing technical assistance with our range land management folks. If there's any questions for that, It's just an interactive process. I'm hoping I read that question right. And then how did the state office complete the stewardship threshold if planning is not done in CD? So they took the tribe has collected 10 years worth of range assessment data. They balled all that up. We took it to the state office, and the state range management specialist put that into our range assessments, our range health inventory tools, or range health assessment, I guess, and completed our stewardship project. It's just a different way of doing it. It's kind of the old school way, pre conservation desktop way that of doing that, as opposed to NCD. We didn't want this NCD at all, and the tribes weren't. They were fine with it, but our state conservationists chose not to have this stuff put in CD or Portrax. It's totally outside the realm of what we were trying to do there.
Great, thank you. All right, let's move on to our next presenter, John George. Do we have John on the line today?
Yeah, Cassius, I'm here.
All right, I'm going to hand it over to you, John. It looks like John was working with the Duckwater Shoshone tribe to develop an EQIP AFA. Am I correct in that?
Yes, sir.
All right.
So good afternoon, everybody. I'm sitting here going, please don't call my name. Please don't call my name, because I'm going to look like the B team coming up against Ed. But so my name's John George. I'm the tribal liaison here in Nevada. Been here for about 3 years, have worked across the West exclusively. So what I'm going to visit with you a little bit about is more of the EQIP AFA side of the house. And just to preface the discussion, we are nowhere near as far into the process as what Ed and Colorado are in right at the moment. But I think there's a lot of tones of what Ed talked about you're going to hear in my discussion. I don't have a formal presentation to give as far as a PowerPoint. I'm going to kind of live stream it here for you, and we're just going to kick along. So in Nevada, we're very rural, I think, as most folks know. And we've had interest in 3 tribes so far, but we've really taken the same approach that Ed's taken in Colorado, with making sure that this is 100% tribally driven. We did know in the state that we had interest in some larger irrigation improvements. Knowing what Keisha and the crew in Arizona had done in the past with irrigation-based things, that was somewhere we thought we could really help tribes along in discussions. So I, as the tribal liaison for the state, working with the local DCs, contacted each one of those tribes and said, hey, here's an opportunity we think might be beneficial for the tribe. Here's what we've heard in the past for potential projects, larger scale. What do you think about looking at those? One tribe said, yes, we're very interested in it. We started down the path, but an audit started in their department while we were having the discussions. So they said, well, let's pump the brakes on this a little bit and see how the audit comes out. And then we'll get back to you. So we're currently waiting on that. Another tribe we discussed the matter with, it's about a $6 million project. The discussions kind of went on for about a month. And what was determined there was the ability to just cash flow what would have been their 10%, and we'll talk about this 10% number, was still excessive enough that the tribe at this time would not be able to move forward with something like that. But there are some discussions to see if there's some additional funding they can pull in. So the third tribe we had reached out to, again, was the Duckwater. To Ed's point, I would not share that information, but the tribe has told me, no problems, we're okay with you sharing. Another large project that we had been talking about for several years, tried to get through EQIP, but again, just the sheer ability of cost of meeting their portion of the payment rate was going to exclude them. So I'll give you a rough idea of where we're talking about here. So the Duckwater Tribe is located roughly 4 hours from anywhere of a major population base. So they're roughly 5 hours out to Reno, a little less than 5 hours to Las Vegas, and right at 4.5 hours out to Salt Lake. So getting supplies in is a little bit rough. I'm up here in Elko. It's about a 3-hour drive for me to get down to Duckwater. Ely is just out here to the east. It's about an hour and a half. Decent sized population base, but not the plethora of materials that you would be looking for. So, and we're talking large mining country, right? So prices inherently are higher than most places in the country because the mines are gobbling up every piece of materials that you can get. So between our payment rate scenarios and general equip being fairly low compared to what the costs are, and then just the scale of what we were originally talking about in this project, we really thought AAFA would be a better spot to go to. So with that, I'm going to zoom us in here a little bit. So again, to Ed's point, I don't know that we necessarily just said this was going to come from the state office or it was going to be a state office centric process, but we do realize that whether it's CSP or EQIP, it's a negotiated process through grants and agreements. But I'm very much of the mind that anything that we do, our local field offices need to be aware of, and we want them to be participating in it because they take a lot of value in these kind of projects. And then our field offices in Nevada have pretty good relationships with our tribal community. So I want to honor that and make sure that we're keeping that relationship going. So initially, the proposal was to replace the original EQIP proposal was to replace about 5.5 miles of concrete pipe that was felt to be leaking excessively. And this pipe was installed by the Bureau of Indian Affairs about 1983. There was concerns from the tribe of lost water in the system. And as you can see down through here, there's fields that had historically been irrigated at one time, but didn't feel like they were getting the adequate water that they needed. So we started down the discussion line of, well, where are these problems coming up at? Where do we see the loss of the water? And what we really started finding out is that some of these issues along the fields down through here were longer standing than just busted up concrete pipe. And in talking to council and the elders, what we found out was that at one time, so this is Duckwater Creek that runs down through here. At one time, Duckwater Creek actually swept up here to the north, wrapped back around, and it serviced all these fields. So what the producers down through there would do is they would block the water up, get about 14 CFS of water going through these fields, and they were always lush and green. When BIA put this pipe in and they brought all the water rights back up here to the delivery point, it went from 14 CFS to about 8 CFS. So that was their first kind of notch down on the amount of water they were getting. And that's their water rights through the Nevada Department of Water Resources. But there's a couple of other complicators in this deal. So I'm going to throw up a picture here. So again, remember, they were originally looking at about 5.5 miles of replacement pipe. And of course, my picture goes away. So this is a really unique system and one I've never really worked on in the West. So this picture is actually right here where my hand's at. It's what is referred to as the Big Warm Springs. It's this beautiful warm springs, pops up in the middle of the desert, puts out anywhere between about 13 to 16 CFS of water. And she goes down through the creek. It's warm. It comes out of the ground at about 89 degrees, and she holds 87 quite a ways down. So grows moss like nothing you've ever seen before. When BIA developed this system, they developed it in a way that the takeout is right here where my hand's at, and it dumps it into this canal that the BIA had put in here. So what happens is all this warm water goes in, we get this mass flush of growth of material in a dead end system. It all gets sucked up down here to the bottom, and there's a screen down at the bottom. And it's just a solid mass of moss. Then we get this leakage that we're losing water out of the canal. Now there is a structure in here. There's an agreement in place with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to service these created wetlands down through here. But there's a lot of seepage we're losing out of the canal too. So between blockage of the screen and seepage out of the canal, we started asking questions of elders and the folks that we had been given as our point of contacts. Well, what's really driving this issue? Corey Lytle, I think Corey's on the call now. He used to be our district conservationist in Ely. He's now our area conservationist for Nevada. He had did some numbers work up for the tribe, and to replace this entire concrete pipe, we were looking at a number around $2 million. That was if it was just a general equip sign up. And we really started looking down through the system, and we weren't, if you look at this map, you don't see a lot of mass leakage along the pipe. So we asked the folks that we had been given charge to do this, what would you think of, instead of replacing this entire concrete pipe, if we just fix the most apparent problem we have right now, which is the leakage out of the ditch and this plugging of the screen down at the bottom. So we're looking at irrigation efficiency project is what we're looking at. After a fair amount of debate and really looking at this screening system and the maintenance that was happening at it, the tribe said, we would rather spend, $20,000 or $30,000, the 10% of our own money, versus trying to come up with $200,000 or $300,000 to replace this entire pipe. So again, along Ed's line, we really worked to keep this at what the tribe was trying to do within the scope of what we can do as an agency. So the tribe said, let's remove this option of doing the entire pipeline, and let's look at an option that looks more like this. So what we came up with was getting a system that's a closed system. It will attach into that old pipeline. My angle's off a little bit here, so I apologize. Oops. So it'll attach into this concrete system, but at the end of the day, we don't have the loss from the ditch, from the canal. It's not really a ditch, it's a canal. And they would have an open system where they could sweep the live moss off, let it go downstream, and they have an easier way of cleaning things out. So that our estimates are that while they have an 8 CFS water right to go down through, and they're actually taking a number that exceeds that at the structure, by the time it gets down here to this plugged up structure and we have all this ditch, they're probably getting less than 6 CFS is what our figures are. So if we can get them a better flowing system that doesn't leak, they can put their full 8 down the canal, the pipe, when we pipe it, then we've got a better system that works for everybody. Like Ed talked about what Clint was looking for in Colorado, which our new state con, I believe, is looking for in Nevada, is a win-win for everybody. So this is the project now that the tribe has kind of settled on. They want to work on. We're going to be looking at flow, or a new head gate structure attached to the pipeline that we're going to put in. It's going to be roughly about 1,020 feet of 27-inch pipe. And we're going to put a mag meter at the top end of it. In general, that would just be a normal equip project. The problem is the map I showed you before at the broader scale. The cost of getting these materials in and getting the labor to do it is excessively high. So within an EQIP AFA, we can look at several ways of funding this project as far as how we set money aside within an agreement. We could look at just doing general payment rates, or we can actually look at doing 90% of actual cost. So what to me that allows us to do is for us to have a conversation with the tribe to say, okay, we've scoped this thing out. We've talked about some of the complexities that we've got to work through. We worked through those complexities. We've got you scoped out and we figured out extents. So here's some basic extents you need to go out, talk to some vendors and get, 2, 3, 4 bids on what actual cost on this would look like. Once that actual cost is figured out, we currently have a draft proposal ready to go to the state office that's been reviewed by our state office for submittal up for the start, the consideration and the negotiation process of an agreement. So right now where we're at in Nevada is the tribe is out working through a request for proposals. Once they have those back in, then we'll sit down with them and say, okay, where do you think you would want to go through for this project for a contractor? And that will become the actual cost that we will look at going forward for a submittal of our proposal. My understanding is we can just take EQIP dollars that if our state conservationist wants to set aside, we can take those from our state pot and do that. So again, not as far along as what Ed is, but kind of the process we've been going through here in Nevada in working this project through and just trying to get our first one done. We're hoping once we get this one done, it'll prove up so that we can move into these other 2 tribes or any of the tribes in Nevada that are interested and use it as our model for success moving forward. So not as long as Ed's presentation, Cassius, but that's kind of what I got for y'all, unless you have some questions. Yeah.
No, that's perfect, John. Well done. Any questions?
Nothing in the chat at the moment, Cassius.
All right. Thank you, Dave. Good. Yeah, no, that was a great presentation, a good application of it. And then again, other reasons why AFAs, and using them would be beneficial for NRCS and the tribe. Next, we have Montana NRCS. We have Tricia Craycroft. And I thank you, Tricia, for putting in there in the chat regarding TA percentage in the policy dealing with indirect costs for tribes. And are you all set? I'm going to turn it over to you, Tricia.
Thanks, Cassius. Yeah, I just cited the policy there. I wasn't sure if the TA question was which way it was trying to go. So as you've all heard, the interpretation of policy is kind of up to the states. And so I'd encourage everybody to become familiar with the policy, not only rely on what you're hearing from today from the different states, because that's just how the state has chosen to do it and worked with their nations in their states on developing these agreements. And it can be done lots of different ways, depending on the resources are available and how the two entities work together. So here in Montana, I apologize, I don't have a PowerPoint or a fancy map like John George, so you'll just get to bear with me while I talk through this with you. Feel free to ask questions if you have any. So Montana developed 2 AFAs with 2 of our tribal nations back in 22. The 2 tribes took different approaches. We have one with Chippewa Cree of the Rocky Boys Reservation, and then one with the Fort Belknap Indian community. The Fort Belknap Indian community had a good idea of a project that they had in mind. So we had a good parameters for what they wanted to accomplish within their AFA versus Rocky Boys didn't go with the project focus. They just wanted to develop an AFA and offer it to all of the community members to address rangeland resource issues. But how did we come to developing the AFA? It was years in the making of both of these reservations are on the Montana Highline, really remote, hard to get to. Had historically had a hard time getting contractors or services to these areas. And then when they were able to have contractors up there, the prices just were a lot higher than what our cost list could provide. Even with the historically underserved, using the A2 cost list, we're hitting that maybe 30%, maybe 40% mark of what these projects were costing. So as a state, we tried to work with the payment schedule team, tried to develop other ways to address the hurdle of the gap in funding for these producers. And really, it kind of fell down, or it was brought to Montana to work on developing an AFA, which you've heard the others talk about, allows for up to that 90% actual cost or the payment schedule, whichever is greater. So the development of the AFAs were very similar to what you heard Ed talked about, where it was held at the state office level with as few NRCS people as we could manage. We didn't want to appear that there was that we weren't, excuse me, I'm drawing a blank here, that we weren't coming up telling them what they were going to do or how they were going to do it. We wanted it to be tribally led, as much participation from them as we could as we worked through this process. Keep in mind, we didn't have anybody to talk through to say, hey, how did you do that? Or anybody to bounce ideas off of. We were pretty much, figuring it out based on the policy and then the guidance that we could get from headquarters. So we worked for the better part of a year to get the terms of the agreement, the programmatic agreement in place, and then shot for end of FY22 signature date and was able to make that. I think because of the way the two agreements were set up under different circumstances, being that Fort Belknap had a very defined project area, they had already talked to contractors, they had a price, they had a bid in that they could work from. They were able to hit the ground running and get things implemented, and were able to work through a lot of their project, and eventually got shut down due to weather last year. So they've made really good progress. They're about 70-75% complete of their project. So things have moved pretty smoothly with them. With Chippewa Cree, because they didn't have a specific project in mind, they left it up to producers to be able to enroll in the program. We had to develop the ranking and pretty much follow our EQIP process to get things implemented. And then they have had a really hard time getting a well driller to come up and start these projects. So we've had to work with them on modifying the expiration of the agreement already. Another difference between the two, Fort Belknap opted not to do any of that indirect costs. They wanted all that money to go to the actual project cost. and Chippewa Cree opted to do the indirect cost. But we've seen a change in council members, and we've seen a change in support for that negotiated indirect cost between the two councils. So we've tried to be really flexible and responsive to the needs of the projects, much like during our conservation planning, you know, the projects that we tend to put more time into, think through, tend to go off a lot easier than the ones that kind of don't have as much structure within them. Let's see, trying to think of. Yeah, that's pretty much the gist of it. I guess the big, from my perspective, one of the biggest differences of the AFA versus our regular programs is this 90% cost versus the payment scenarios. And we aren't at a point, we haven't had to go through that process of determining the 90% of the actual cost of these projects. And that's going to be, I think, a big challenge for the state, and kind of takes us back to those of you that have been around a while know the AC days, the actual cost days, where we had to go through receipts and figure out what appurtenances went with what project costs, what practices, what's all included in a practice to make it complete. So that's going to be, I think, where the rubber meets the road, and we really see if some of the big differences of what an AFA can provide versus a general EQIP. The plan for us now is to keep that reimbursement at the state level, and probably will engage the field offices a little bit on the overall review of it, but really trying to keep it at the state level, just because we anticipate it to be pretty time consuming. So, I apologize, Candace. No, I don't know if I did say both of these AFAs are EQIP AFAs. And if that's all I had, unless there are any questions or comments from the group.
Great, thank you, Tricia. Yeah, if there's any questions, go ahead and raise your hand or unmute yourself or put them in the chat. And if not, that's okay too.
Feel free to reach out if there's any questions.
Yes. And Tricia, thank you. I mean, I just want to, kind of acknowledge the tribal led kind of approach that you called out there, and I think that was that's really good to think about. And as a federal agency, we have to really be cognizant of the history with federal Indian policy and the federal government as it relates to tribes, and really try to avoid being paternalistic in any way. And really what we're trying to do is set up tribes for guaranteed success. So, and not really tell them what they need to do or what should do, but work with them and help them, guide them as they need to kind of get through these, get to a place. And if AFAs is that vehicle, then this is a tool in a toolbox. All right, next we have Seth Fielder, who's going to be talking about, RCPP. He's a program specialist, and I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about the potential of RCPP projects with tribes. Might be muted, Seth.
double thank you to Cassius and to everyone else for enduring my inability to use technology. As Cassius introduced me, I am Seth Fiedler. I work with the Regional Conservation Partnership Program out of headquarters. I've been there since about 2016. Prior to that, I spent about 15 years doing everything program management like at the New Mexico State office, and a lesser time actually in field offices before that. So I've been around a minute, mostly in Indian country. Always jump at the opportunity to make this presentation, which we've done once before, which is really an effort to try to give you guys the tools to maybe understand enough about RCPP to help tribes decide, hey, is this an opportunity I want to investigate further? Is this something that could work in my area, on my pueblo, in my reservation, whatever? So it's not a comprehensive look at RCPP. It's half sales pitch, half information. It will be followed by a presentation by Jared out of Washington on an actual project. So I'm not even going to get into actual project details. I'm going to do the headquarters program overview thing for you. Jared's going to talk a little bit about some implementation opportunities and challenges that they encountered in a particular Washington project. So with that said, basically RCPP, unlike what a lot of people think, really is kind of just a classic Farm Bill program. The purpose of the program is to deliver conservation, to address conservation needs, what we call resource concerns in NRCS speak, what our statute calls conservation benefits, to Farm Bill eligible producers and on Farm Bill eligible lands. So really, there's not a lot about partnership in the program name, but we deliver through partners. And I'm going to turn on my slides now because I just forgot. So there we go. I warned you I was no good at technology, but it's apparently worse today than normal. So again, we're going to deliver through partnership agreements. And so there's going to be partners involved, and I'm going to tell you how they get involved. And it's sort of a whole range of how much capacity does the partner have. That's going to ultimately dictate, I think, in a successful project, how much they should bite off and where we should try to draw the lines between NRCS and partners, including tribal partners, in any given RCPP project. So first off, where are we as a program? Well, you guys may have heard we got a pile of money through IRA, and our current NFO is open from now through the very beginning of July. So we've got about 90 days to solicit proposals. We are a traditional proposal-based program to consume this $1.5 billion. There's about 100 million set aside targeted for tribal projects, not just AFA. In our prior NFO, we did specifically target them for AFA, but AFAs in our CPP are actually, they really demand a pretty high level of expertise on the partner's part. So it may or may not be the only fit for a tribe that's interested in the program. So we try not to spin it just for AFA. We talk about the program totally. The maximum project size is 25 million and the minimum is $250,000. Generally, our TA, our project, RCPP side money in a project, that 25 million, is split 75 FA and 25 TA. And the TA is more restricted than what you heard in EQIP, for instance. We can't pay a partner's administrative expenses. We can't pay a partner's indirect costs. So that often limits, to just be brutally honest, that often limits many partners' interest in our program, including many tribal partners, because if they're able to receive their indirect costs through another program, they may just jump to that other program, right? All that said, we do have a high, we have 75% TA, and we can pay up to 100% of actual cost to install eligible FA activities. So in some ways, what we lose on the TA side in flexibility, we can offer back on the FA side. And we hope that that balance, which really comes from our statute, it wasn't a choice, that balance helps people pick the best opportunity for them. And of course, RFA can be used for almost anything the agency does. We do land management and rentals, which basically covers everything from EQIP to CRP. We have US and entity held easements like ALE or WRE, but without the land use restrictions. And we have watershed or infrastructure work like PL 566. So our FA is super broad, not limited to a single program's authority, but it is limited to the authorities of all of those programs. We can't do water supply for a municipality because it's not a Farm Bill eligible activity. We can do water supply for an irrigation activity under either this watershed or land management because it is Farm Bill eligible. So that's sort of rough view of FA. How can tribes participate in an RCPP project? Well, the simplest way for anybody to participate, tribal or not tribal, is really just as a producer or landowner. If there's a project in your area, of course, the tribe or anybody else can apply, and they could potentially get a contract under that project. That's not what people typically think about with RCPP when they think about production or participation. They typically think about, hey, I want to participate as a partner. I want to define a project. And if a tribe is interested in that partner role within a project, they really need to start looking at, ideally with our help, right? They need to start looking at what is their staff capacity, how much involvement are they really prepared to have in a project, and then pick the appropriate type of project to apply for. So if they've got relatively limited staff, they may want to just use the sort of basic RCPP classic model, or they may progressively want to provide some TA or ultimately deliver the financial assistance. As you go down this list, and I'll come back to it later in my presentation, you get more demands on the partner, but you also get more control locally or partner side. So the tribe would have more control in an AFA project than they would in a classic project, and I'll show you why here in a minute. Tribes may also be able to participate both as a producer beneficiary and as a partner, but that raises some conflict of interest issues that I'll touch on towards the end of my presentation. So who can apply? Well, to be a lead partner, almost anybody can apply to be a lead partner in RCPP. Tribes are certainly, a listed entity, but if you look at this number 8, anybody with an established history of working collaboratively with producers on ag land is a potentially eligible partner. So that's almost anybody that's ever done anything except take a contract from a producer. If your only involvement, you're an engineering company and your only involvement with a producer has been to provide a paid design to that producer, you're not working collaboratively. But if you're actually out there providing some of your dollars alongside some of the producer's dollars, you're probably going to fall under this number 8. So Indian tribe or almost any other organization working with an Indian tribe could potentially host or lead a RCPP tribal project. All right, that's getting kind of confusing, right? Like, is this a grant or is this not a grant? Well, RCPP is not a grant. It really is a partnership program, and it establishes sort of minimum requirements for partners and then what they can do. So at a minimum, they're going to propose a project area and targeted conservation benefits. Maybe that's, I don't know, the Eastern Navajo Nation is the project area, and the targeted conservation benefit is rangeland health, right? That's not a real project. It's just a hypothetical concept. But that's the minimum that the Navajo Nation would have to propose. Then they'd have to decide how they wanted to collaborate with NRCS on the specific roles and responsibilities in the project. Is the partner going to provide TA? Is the partner going to write FA contracts, or is NRCS going to? If the partner is going to write the FA contracts with producers, that in our world makes it a AFA project. We use the same words like Pedro mentioned in the beginning. The statute did this to us as well. Alternative funding arrangement in RCPP is not the same authority as alternative funding arrangement in EQIP/CSP. Just the same words, unfortunately. Classic isn't even a statutory term. It's just what we call our non-AFA projects. Partners also have to provide contributions that can be a mix of cash or in-kind, FA or TA, and they have to report on contributions and project outcomes. So there's a certain level of partner responsibility even in the most basic projects. And then depending on partner capacity, interest, and so forth, they may be able to earn TA for providing eligible services like the project management and the reporting of contributions. Or if they've got technically savvy staff, they may be able to deliver FA and or provide the TA to deliver FA. So it's kind of, again, a sort of progressive scale. And another way to look at that is to look at the 2 project types discretely. We have RCPP classic projects, which really looks like a fund pool. Partner comes to NRCS and says, hey, I want a fund pool to address these resource concerns in this area. I'm not too worried about the program rules we're going to use. Maybe it's some land management, some rental, some easements, doesn't matter. You mix it all up, you come up with a fund pool to address those resource concerns in that area, and it becomes a project. NRCS is typically mostly responsible for delivering all the TA, so the partner doesn't have to have a lot of capacity. However, the partner does have to, do a certain amount of outreach, a little bit of income, impact assessment and so forth. They can probably earn TAE for those roles, so they can probably get paid for them as long as they're specific to the project. They can just never earn indirect cost multiplier rate on top of the actual costs in the project. If you jump over to the alternative funding arrangement side of our program, it talks a lot more about partner responsibilities. The partner is going to lead the installation of practices and or to reimburse producers for FA installations. So now instead of NRCS to producer contracts, you've got partner contracts to deliver FA. The partner is going to be in charge for delivering most TA to spec. So they need qualified folks to do that. And then NRCS's role is going to be limited to basically non-delegable tasks, such as NEPA certifications and helping ensure the eligibility of benefited producers and lands. So hopefully you're starting to get an image of, okay, RCPP isn't one thing, it's kind of a range of things. And the range deliverable in any location can be set at that location. Just sort of before you get too far down one path or the other, it really is important to recognize that no matter Classic or AFA, which model of the program you use, you still basically have to follow practice standards and specs. You have to meet NEPA. Things have to be competitive and non-discriminatory. Even if the partner is stepping into NRCS shoes in an AFA project, now the partner is agreeing to be non-discriminatory and, you know, service everybody equally, blah, blah, blah. We can't change Farm Bill eligibility with a project. We can, of course, affect ranking, but we cannot affect eligibility. So we have to watch all those kind of, you know, federal requirements don't go away just because you're in RCPP land. We can't pay for partner administrative expenses. FA requires plans, designs, blah, blah, blah. And TA is primarily available to deliver FA unless we determine that it's available to support those partner project management expenses that the partner has to do, like outcome assessment and reporting. We almost always do make that determination, which is to say we always make TA available to partners to pay their project management expenses. But we are primarily responsible first for delivering FA to spec and secondarily for helping partners with their administrative expenses. So there can be a little bit of balance there. A partner may not get all the project management dollars that they would hope for, but we should be able to support them with at least some. So how TA works? Well, it's really divided into two buckets. We have TAI and TAE. Our TAI bucket is really the money that we basically set aside to ensure that we have plans, designs, checkout activities, and that all the FA we put in is to spec. We expect that to consume, on average, somewhere between 18 and up to the full 25% of the project TA. Delivery can be by NRCS, or if the partner's prepared to do it to our specs and take the work off NRCS's plate, the partner can do it. Enhancement TA is that other kind of project management TA that I've been talking about. It's really only available to partners, and it's only available to help them pay their non-parcel specific, i.e. non-FA specific project management needs, things like outcome assessment at the project level or contribution reporting at the project level. Basically just gives them some staff time to help participate in the program. What are partner contributions? Well, the statute says partners have to provide a significant portion of the overall cost of a project. The statute does not talk about match. It talks about leverage, and it doesn't set a ratio. So there's no current ratio in the updated NFIOs. We used to say 1-to-1 until year before last. Now we basically, with the advent of IRA money, we have removed the target 1-to-1 ratio of contributions to RCPP dollars, and instead said, yeah, just show us what significant portion of overall costs you're going to bear, partner, and we'll consider it. Contributions don't have to be cash or in kind. They don't have to be, unless you get to entity held easements at the parcel level, they can just be somewhere else in the project. And in fact, we can even count non-USDA federal activity as contribution. So in a tribal situation, this is a huge opportunity, because really it means any program that's active in the project area, you know, whether it's a Department of Interior effort through BOR or BIA or a tribe themselves, anything that is happening out there in the project area that benefits the project resource concerns can meet the contribution requirement. So what have I told you? I've told you can earn up to 100% RCPP FA for FA activities, and that your contributions can largely come from things in the same area that are just doing good stuff. Doesn't really matter whose dollars they are, as long as they're not USDA. So really, the requirements of partners are kind of limited when you think about it in that perspective. There's no cash out of pocket necessarily. There's some reporting requirements for which they can potentially get paid through TAI, or excuse me, TAE. And there's the possibility they can earn up to 100% of the FA cost. So in some ways, we're pretty good. In other ways, we're a template-based program that may or may not fit everybody. And that's been our biggest issue so far with tribes, is sort of getting over the hurdle that, hey, this is a template-based program, and you have to start working with NRCS relatively early to get to a place where you're going to understand enough about our templates to decide whether it works for you. So that's part of what we're doing here today, is saying, hey, it's still early enough in this current NFO period that you as NRCS folks out there may want to touch base with your state RCPP coordinators and or your tribal partners, potential tribal partners, and see if we can generate some interest. And that's what I'm hoping you'll do. Eligible FA activities, as I mentioned at the onset, are really informed by our covered programs. And at the end of the day, we can support through RCPP FA almost anything that we can support through our other programs, right? There's no real hard lines here between one another. We do have specific templated based contracts for these things, but a project can be a weird mix of any combo. We don't get to sidestep our environmental responsibilities, and as such, we lean heavily on the conservation practices and the existing categorical exclusions that go with them, because that basically allows us to implement FA activities without spending a year or two on a NEPA document. We don't get to delegate our responsibilities with respect to those NEPA decisions or the 106, any of that kind of stuff, to our partners. So we still have an active role, even in an AFA project, to maintain these things. But the use of practices really does kind of allow us, as long as a partner is interested in and willing to help us implement practices, it makes RCPP pretty easy to implement compared to something like, oh, I don't know, CIG, where at least theoretically we're supposed to be doing an EA to analyze anything that doesn't fall under a practice standard. We can still support those truly innovative methods, i.e. things that aren't consistent with practice standards, but in that case, we would have to do a separate NEPA analysis, so it can potentially slow down a project. So some additional funding considerations that folks often overlook when they're putting together their proposals, and I wanted to get them in front of you guys in case you actually do find an interested partner. RCPP FA is only available for work that has been installed and meets specs. We do not have the same advanced payment authority that other programs, including EQIP, have. So we simply can't pay for work until it's done, at least on the FA side. There's some very specific TA cases where we can, but on the FA side, we are really tied to practices installed. In that AFA versus classic model, AFA is a little bit more limiting in some ways. Specifically, in an AFA project, all the work has to be completely installed and billed during the project term, because we don't have any authority to pay other than the partnership agreement. The partner's going to get money as long as they get the work installed and get it billed during the partnership agreement. That's familiar to us in the EQIP world too, of course, right? The producer's on the hook to get that same kind of thing done. But in classic RCPP projects, oddly, our producer contracts, which is to say the contracts between NRCS and that eligible landowner or producer, can actually outlive the partnership agreement. So we basically have more flexibility in classic for longer projects than we do in AFA. But the trade-off is that partner-led element is reduced in the classic side. So again, it's kind of a decision point for partners making application. We also have an interesting wrinkle associated with this influx of IRA money. We've got about $1.2 billion of IRA money and only about 300 million of Farm Bill money. The Farm Bill money allows us to write partnership agreements really for up to 10 years with no specific requirement as to when those funds have to be expended, other than the AFA versus classic requirements I mentioned above. But in an IRA world, we have to, as you guys know from your EQIP appendix stuff, we have to have all the money spent by September 2031 in IRA. So basically what it's doing is saying is, even in a classic project, if it's IRA funded, your maximum term is going to be less than it would be in a Farm Bill funded project. But there's a lot more money. So there you go. Ultimately, the decision as to whether or not a project would be IRA versus Farm Bill funded is made by NRCS based on the proposals. We don't ask the partners, hey, which fund pool do you want to compete in? We do ask that for state versus CCA, but we do not ask that for IRA versus Farm Bill. Basically, as an agency, we have to push everything we can towards the IRA side in order to be successful in implementing IRA responsibilities. So that's what we're going to do. That may inconvenience some projects and partners, and they should clearly denote that issue in their proposal if they think that the time limits are going to be a problem. Then you get to this state versus multi-state and critical conservation area issues. The Farm Bill it created two fund pools for us, state and multi-state. They actually also apply to the IRA money. So between IRA and Farm Bill money, we're expected to have a 50-50 split between Farm Bill and IRA. Excuse me, between multi-state and critical conservation area. We're currently undersubscribed in our CCAs. So we're pushing the CCA side of the program pretty hard. You can see there's a map here. We have CCAs in most of our states, and a project boundary can be counted as within a CCA boundary, so long as the CCA boundary includes a portion of the county being offered, all or a portion. So if this line happens to traverse a county in Oregon, and half the county is in and half the county is out, that whole county can be considered in the CCA. But that's the only flexibility in the CCA boundaries we have. We do encourage tribes right now to consider the CCA option for two reasons. First, this balance issue, and we're trying to get back to 50-50. And second, and I guess as a mechanism to encourage that, shoot, I'm going to have to come back. As a message to encourage that, we have some special proposal assistance available to tribes. And I have a slide on that here in a second. So I will say that if they apply in a CCA, as an underserved partner, there's going to be some special assistance available in actually writing the project proposal. But first, we'll touch on this. Can a partner, tribal or otherwise, be both a TA provider and an FA award beneficiary? The answer is really sometimes, but the partnership agreement and the proposal really need to aggressively deal with the potential conflict of interest situations, because we can't give the appearance that we're selecting FA projects after the fact and giving them only to the lead partner, for instance. That's not a thing. That's not competitive. On the other hand, if the proposal says the lead partner is going to reserve the money unto themselves and the chief selects that proposal, then it's perfectly viable to limit participation to tribals. We just have to make sure that the proposal has enough details of the FA implementation plan that when the chief makes a selection, we've avoided some of the conflict of interest issues. Ultimately, project negotiations and budgeting are going to have to dive down into this, but the more detail that the partner, tribal or otherwise, can get into their proposal about their level of interest in FA versus TA, the more streamlined those project negotiations will be. I will show you this next slide. It basically gives you some examples of, okay, in a classic project and an AFA project, and if you're talking about land management and rental, what kind of conflicts of interest might you have? What kind of issues might you have to resolve? Well, partners in classic is generally going to be limited to either FA or TA. Because if they're seeking FA, they can't participate in application ranking. They can't develop their own plan or their own design. They can't check out their own practices. So unless they're limiting themselves to TAE, that project management TA, they're not going to be able to earn TAI. Okay, it gets even worse in AFA, because then you're universally expecting the partner to rank the proposals, and unless they're sub-proposals, let's call it individual applications. If those individual applications include one from the tribe and one from somebody who's a tribal member and a third from somebody who's not even a tribal member but happens to be tribal adjacent, that's not a fair position to the tribal adjacent person unless the proposal said, hey, this is only money available for tribes. So again, it kind of comes down to what kind of detail can the partner get into their proposal? How do they actually expect the money to be used before we can get to a viable model? U.S. held easements have almost no TA role for partners. Similarly, entity held easements have very limited role for TA for partners. So those two are rarely an issue that's different. It's mostly in land management that conflict of interest stuff comes up. Watershed project negotiations, because the products, plan, design, installation, and checkout are so discrete and tied to a single structure or facility usually, it's pretty easy to get to a NRCS versus partner roles thing that prevents conflict of interest. It's really just in these competitive land management ones that we have trouble. So where would you go if you said, well, there's not quite enough here for me to talk to a partner about this, or for a partner to make good information available to their boards, etc. What would you investigate? Well, the website is really the best place to go. There's also a couple of scheduled partner webinars coming up. They require registration this year, which they have not in the past. So if you do have potentially interested partners, make sure they're aware of this registration requirement before the 23rd of April and or the 30th of May. It will be roughly the same info presented at both presentations. Of course, the questions will be different, and who knows what we will have learned in the 5 weeks between meetings, so they may not be exactly identical. Here's where we come back to this special assistance available for tribes. If they're applying in a CCA, they can apply for free proposal writing assistance via a process posted to the webpage and communicated to the coordinators via email back on 4.4. These are RCPP coordinators, of course, not tribal coordinators. So if you're looking for who in your state might have it, the RCPP coordinator would. It's really just a super simple one-page application that says, hey, I want to be considered for the first 20 slots. We've got 3 already out of the 20 consumed, where a tribe has asked for proposal writing assistance. That'll be provided by a contractor under a federally or a nationally funded contract. So no cost to the state, no cost to the partner, but the opportunity to get some help writing a proposal. Before they do that, though, ideally they should have a project that works, right? So I see nothing wrong with dumping an application in the inbox to try to secure your spot in line of the 20. But then even before you try to meet with the contractors or your partner does, they should be reviewing the info on the web, and they should be talking to the state coordinator, try and come up with a viable project model that falls somewhere along that spectrum of classic to AFA, and see whether or not the partner can, or the contractor can help them write it. And this is that spectrum kind of written out in a progressively more complicated way, progressively more complicated for partner kind of way. So an RCPP classic project with NRCS TAI only, with or without partner getting paid for their project management or TAE, is our simplest project. And an AFA with a watershed structure would be our most complicated. In between, you get sort of progressively more complicated as you go down this list. In a classic project, NRCS and a partner are each going to help deliver TAI in support of FA. Okay, partner has to be familiar with TAI requirements. NRCS has to coordinate that with partner, but we can get it done in a shared way. This is probably our most common classic project right here, but this one is totally viable. You can also switch to a totally partner or tribal, in this case, led classic. This is a classic project with FA delivery in part by the tribe. So this is using a type 2 supplemental. Things are starting to get more complicated. You're getting more contract instruments. You're getting less competition, less CD cart, more negotiated, but still classic project. A lot of RCPP and RCS involvement. Oops. Excuse me. What have I done? And then you jump over to the AFAs, and the simplest AFAs are land management only, because of course, if you had easements or you had watersheds, you end up with a whole much more complicated set of rules. But an AFA land management project based on, say, a pay for performance model, or a AFA based on our cost lists, both of those are common AFAs, and they work for partners with reasonable TA delivery expertise. Finally, getting to watersheds and infrastructure stuff, then you're talking really complicated. You're talking about the necessity for familiarity with the watershed manual and the National Engineering Manual. And of course, you can get some of that done through hiring good contractors, but you're starting to slip out of the RCPP 5-year time frame, getting to a really complicated land where, yeah, it might be doable, but before you want to jump into that world, you really need to know what you're doing. So again, the key to all this is to help a partner understand what they want, what they can do, what they want us to do, us being NRCS, and then sort of scoping a proposal around that. This program, although it is a proposal-based program, doesn't expect those negotiations to happen in a vacuum. The partners are basically directed in the notice of funding opportunity to collaborate with the states, and or we're asking you as NRCS employees to reach out to those partners if you think there's a good project out there and encourage them to think about it, and then lead them through what's called the State Conservationist Questionnaire and the Notice of Funding Opportunity to get to a viable proposal. Not in a vacuum. Lots of partnership between NRCS and the applicants, even during the proposal writing phase. And that's the job of your state RCPP coordinator. So with that said, I think I'm not going to go through the individual examples. I'm going to reserve the time for Jared to go through his local and more specific examples, unless there are questions for me.
Great, thank you, Seth. If there's any questions.
So
Okay, there's one.
There's a few up there,
Oh,
yeah.
yep, for you. Yep, go ahead.
Do you want me to read them? Do you want to read them?
Yeah, you can go ahead and read them if you.
All right. Sorry, guys, get to hear my boring voice some more. Because these are tribal led and you are matching up what they are doing with specific practices / enhancements of NRCS, EQIP, or CSB, are you modifying NRCS practice to work with the tribe needs? So that question may have actually been to Candace, or it may be to me. I think the answer is probably the same in that, at least on the RCPP side, and I suspect on the EQIP side, we can look at practices in the practice construct versus the payment scenario construct. And that's where we need to be looking at practices. Hey, can we find a practice that we can meet the local need with? And if we don't have a payment scenario that goes with that, we can figure out how to pay for it separately. We have a practice that deals with almost everything. And in RCPP in particular, we encourage states to find the practice that work fits under so that we can use the 52 and we don't get suckered into a more complicated NEPR process. We still have to have technical requirements that deal with, okay, this particular scenario out on the, I'm sorry, Duck Lake, the last project that the gentleman talked about had duck in the name. You know, he's got real high mobilization costs. The actual cost is going to far exceed the typical scenario cost. We can pay up to 100% of the actual cost in our CPP. And if the structure they're putting in doesn't fall under a particular payment scenario, we don't care because we're paying actual cost of what is needed to address the resource concern. So that's how we try to toe or balance that line between practices and enhancements. And Tricia answered that similarly, I think, but we'll see. Justin asks, can we do advanced payments with our CPP like we can do through EQIP? Absolutely not in our CPP. We do not have EQIP's advanced payment authority at this point in time. It has been noted, it is on the potential to be fixed by Congress list. Whether it will happen in the next Farm Bill, I don't know. But for now, we have no authority to make advances, which basically means that work has to be fully delivered before we can pay for it, whether it's by a producer through a producer contract or a partner through a partnership agreement / supplemental agreement. There's no way we can pay for work that isn't actually done and complete to spec. That's just where we're at with our CPP. And then finally, is there a limit to the number of AFA projects that a partner could submit, provided the projects don't overlap? We actually don't care if they overlap. Our statutes or our regulation, it's actually our NFO, stipulates only that a partner cannot submit the same proposal in multiple funding pools. So theoretically, a partner could apply, if we didn't have that limit, in both the CCA and the state / multi-state pool with the same proposal. We do not allow that. But as long as the proposal is somehow different with respect to geography or resource concerns or partners, they can potentially submit very similar proposals in the two fund pools. And there's no additional limits. So if they have different projects, they can submit as many different projects as they want. And that looks like the end of the written questions.
Thank you, Seth. Very comprehensive. Thank you for answering all those questions as well. All
Okay.
right, we have Jared up next, our CP coordinator. Talking. Go ahead.
Before we jump into Jared's, there was one more question, and it's on a critical point, so I want to kind of hit it.
Oh, go ahead. Yes.
No NCRA / indirect for our CPP. So can some administrative costs be negotiated in the PPA if they're shown to be direct in nature? Yes. We have to be super careful not to call them administrative, because that is the specific phrase that is prohibited in our statute. But as long as the expenses that are being discussed are attributable exclusively to the project in question, they are considered, I'm going to say direct. They're considered non-administrative. And once they're non-administrative, we can pay them. So for instance, if there's time needed to manage an engineering contract on the partner's behalf, we can pay that partner to manage the engineering contract because the engineering contract is going to deliver eligible TAI. On the other hand, if the partner wants to buy an airplane and use the airplane to fly on seed, half for our CPP project and half for something else, then we cannot buy that airplane. We, in fact, would have to come up with a different method to value the airplane's time and potentially ensure that we were only paying for the RCPP half of its expense, if you will. So there's often a way around that administrative cost limitation by focusing on the project expense portion of what might otherwise be administrative, but it does create extra record keeping.
Great. Thank you, Seth. All right, Jared, you are up next.
Hi. So my name is Jared Hammond. I am the Western Washington RCPP coordinator, based out of Mount Vernon, but again, working in all of Western Washington. Let me try to do my presentation in there. All right. Can you all see that?
Yep. Looks good.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. So we'll move along rather quickly. So NRCS Washington has had 5 different RCPPs with tribal partnerships. 3 of those are from Farm Bill 14 RCPPs, and 2 of those are from Farm Bill 18 RCPPs. And the reason I'll distinguish that is just in case you are not aware, RCPP, while the same program, had some different rules and different ways of doing things from our Farm Bill 14 to our Farm Bill 18. So just to kind of split it out for acknowledging that there are some differences. One of the things with ours in Washington is every one of them has been focused in some way, shape, or form on habitat, mostly on aquatic habitat, but also on terrestrial and the inadequate fish and wildlife habitat. Those, anytime we have an RCPP, you know, we're going to be addressing a resource concern. That's the language we like to use. And so I just wanted to put that up there just for kind of awareness. There certainly is not a requirement that it has to be wildlife, but in Washington, that's where we find a lot of common goals between NRCS and the priorities of our tribes. So the others that we see in there are water quality, field sediment, nutrient and pathogen loss, water quality degradation, and water quantity, insufficient water, excess, insufficient water, and drought. And again, I'm just putting these out there as examples. It's not an exhaustive list. And even these other water quality and water quantity actually tied a lot to wildlife concerns, primarily salmon, steelhead, and then a few others on upland species. So let's see. So of our 5 projects, one was focused on kind of stream health and fish habitat. They did work such as stream crossing renovation, repair, or removal, road repair or removal to prevent or reduce erosion. And they did some upland habitat work. Another one was for a focus on salmon and steelhead. And some of these are happening on tribal land. Some of these are happening off tribal land, so that's not specific. Another two were the same group and just a first RCPP followed by a second one later on. And again, it was very similar as far as focused on aquatic fish, salmon habitat, along with other species. But then they also included quite a bit of work on non-tribal lands with a focus on irrigation efficiency. And so they had some partners come in to help with that. And the idea was to reduce water usage, allowing more water to remain in the system for the intended habitat benefits. And then another one is one where the tribe was just a contributing partner, is a fish project where the tribe was doing monitoring. So there's multiple ways for the tribes to be involved in these RCPPs, both as both as lead or contributing partners. And then the last one is focused on fish habitat, building large wood structures in streams and rivers to do a few things as far as adjusting the way the river's working, as far as providing cold water habitat for fish or protecting spawning habitat, and going back to a more natural historical state in the rivers. Yeah, so again, Washington tribes have participated as lead partners, as contributing partners. Some of the other partners that have been involved in these projects are conservation districts, also called soil and water conservation districts in other part of the country, irrigation districts, state agencies such as DNR, et cetera, or Department of Natural Resources, sorry. See, one interesting note is one of these RCPPs, it was done with a tribe as a lead partner. And once they had a few successful RCPPs completed, one of the contributing partners actually later on became a lead partner in their own right, carrying on the work. So it's not a tribal RCPP, but it just shows that when this work is started by someone who's able to spend the time and energy to work with us, to partner with us, and then that can result in that same work continuing on with different groups down the road. So real benefit there. And really the main thing with RCPP, whether you're looking at a classic or an AFA, as Seth pointed out, is just that dedicated fund source that as a tribe you're going to be able to put towards your specific goals. Again, those resource concern benefits that I started out with. One thing I will note is that all of our experience with tribes in Washington have been with RCPP Classic agreements, but much, if not everything I'm sharing with you is going to also apply, even if it's an RCPP AFA. Again, just lessons learned and things like that. So we'll start with some of the benefits and advantages. These are things that I've seen, things that I've talked with some of my coworkers here in the state from NRCS about and received their input upon. Tribes are able to take these RCPP funds when they're awarded and really focus them on specific priorities for the tribe, and that means less competition. One example is there were some tribal projects that were happening through EQIP, and they were awesome projects, good salmon habitat projects, but they always had the downside of, because they are rather expensive, having to compete. We don't decide to fund or not fund a project just because it's more or less expensive in EQIP, but you just have the fact of you only have so much money. It's split so many different ways. So sometimes larger projects are just simply need too much funds. RCPP allows the lead partner to really get the selection of funds and put it in place. Then larger scale work, conservation work. Again, this is due to, again, that specific targeting of funds. It's due to farm bill limitations being different within what we call a producer or landowner contract. Specific on the ground work is different in RCPP, as well as, of course, tribes not having payment limitations, but that's not RCPP specific, though we utilize that same benefit here. Technical assistance funds, so that project where a tribe was working on large salmon restoration projects, because that level of design was beyond what local NRCS could do outright. Local NRCS was reviewing it, and the tribe was simply obtaining funds or using their funds to pay for designs. But with RCPP, we're able to put some of these technical assistance dollars that Seth mentioned into the agreement to help pay for those designs. So that's a benefit, whereas EQIP, maybe the project could happen, but with RCPP, we're able to help with also project design. Of course, we help with much project design when we have the capability in EQIP, but again, sometimes it's not possible. Also, things like monitoring of projects, which can be a real benefit in showing the benefit, showing just the outcomes long term. Tribal technical specialists, most, if not all, well, most of the tribes we've worked with have technical resource, natural resource folks. The combined knowledge they are able to share with us in this partnership does a few things. One, we're able to combine that with the technical expertise that NRCS has, and sometimes just do more with that, and other times shared goals. One example for myself is the shared knowledge is just listening to the tribal biologist. I was able to create a much better picture and explanation of why some of the salmon habitat work was needed. That's a real benefit that I can take in future RCPPs, whether they're tribal or non-tribal, and really work towards that same goal, that same priority that the tribe has. With supplemental agreements, so RCPP project, you have the partnership programmatic agreement. That's kind of the overall agreement for the RCPP. It spells out budget, some partners, some things like that, overall goals. You have these supplemental agreements. There's several different types that we don't have time to get into, but some of those allow partners to do significant amounts of work outside of a producer contract. That gives us more flexibility to do work that may be beyond what an individual landowner can do. But it again benefits that producer, those producers, that area. It benefits that resource concern, that shared goal and priority. So there's a real benefit there. Tribes are able to, again, focus on their priority T&E species. The state, Washington State, of course, considers very much so what our tribes value, but we have many different priorities to balance. The tribes can take this RCPP money and focus it on their specific T&E species. And then timeline flexibility. More and more of EQIP and CSP funds operate on timelines that are to some degree set by states and some degree set by national. RCPP allows some more flexibility. There's still the confines of fiscal years and things that we have to work within, but we can really benefit by being a little bit more flexible in how we move forward with these individual landowner producer contracts. Some challenges and lesson learned. Communication is just important, so important, and sometimes difficult. So internal agreed to timelines can help with accountability and communication between the partners. Tribal employees, I mentioned earlier, technical specialists are a great resource. Having one to specifically manage the RCPP can help with transition between other staff changes. But there's a challenge sometimes in that someone who's a great technical skilled person, say a highly trained biologist, ecologist, or similar position, they may not easily be able to move into a planner NRCS type role and take over for a planner just because they have great technical knowledge. Their ability to do the program paperwork, while they can learn to do it, it's not something they do in their normal day-to-day potentially. So that's an area just to be thinking about. And then making sure projects are fully vetted prior to starting an RCPP. That doesn't mean every single project in an RCPP needs to have every single detail figured out, but whether it's, again, classic or AFA, doing a little bit of the work ahead of time, talking with NRCS ahead of time to make sure the project has enough of a complete idea that we can put the amount of FA needed. We can estimate the amount of TA needed and how it's going to be split between who's going to do what, between NRCS, the tribe, and other partners. We want to plan for extra time for projects that are larger. Sorry, I know we're going over time. I'm almost done here. Sometimes these larger projects that are possible because of different limitations kind of push NRCS out of our normal box. And while we still stick to practices and scenarios and everything that Seth mentioned, when we get outside of our normal box, sometimes we move a little slower. And so just plan for extra time for that. And similarly, early on, identifying what practices and practice scenarios this RCPP is going to be utilizing can be very helpful, talking to NRCS about that. And Seth mentioned this, but again, that when the tribe is both a partner and someone's going to hold the contract to do the work on the land, there's a potential conflict of interest and something that needs to be sorted out. And then again, when possible, as I mentioned, you can take work that you're doing successfully through EQIP, through CSP, through easements, but you can build on that and enhance it. And it's a great trial run if you're looking to get into RCPP, but you're maybe not ready yet, is do a little bit of the work through EQIP and CSP where possible to get your staff and NRCS staff familiar with the project and each other, and that really helps to aid in future success in an RCPP when you kind of take it to the next level in scale and purposefulness. And that's all I have for today. Hopefully that was helpful.
Great. Thank you, Jared. Any questions? Pause for a moment in case anyone's writing in the chat. All right, well, no questions. Well, thank you, Jared. And that's the last of our speakers. So I just wanted to say, thank you all for joining us here today. Thank you for the presenters for talking on this subject and being in many ways kind of the the ones that are leading us through this process in the agency, being the first. So and for learning and sharing that knowledge as we work with tribes and use this as a potential vehicle to support tribal trust response, our trust responsibility and tribal sovereignty. So very good information that was shared today. If there was opportunity for folks that I'm sure that are working on these AFAs in the chat, I'm sure you can reach out and get more in-depth information if you need to, or I'm sure they're willing to answer questions as they come up, because this is going to be something that we're going to work collectively. We're going to need to do collectively because it's so varied in the types of projects that could result from AFA, tribal AFAs, and even to a lesser extent RCPP, but still there is a level of complexity and variation that folks sharing this type of information and these type of trainings, I think, are very helpful for states. With that, I want to close out today, and I'm going to close it out in a way that we started it, in a kind of a good way. And I'm going to close today with a few words, just saying that, it's kind of themes related to, partnerships in general, but especially partnerships with tribal nations that are contractual, that are agreements. I mean, these are the new forms of treaties, essentially, that we're engaging in with tribal nations. So that it's always, good for you to kind of do that with an open heart and understand that tribal nations are, even though they are very much advanced in today's, the way conservation is done today. That they still have, concerns and thoughts and ways of knowing that differ from maybe our understanding as an agency, and to really use these opportunities and these tools to really allow those processes to kind of unfold. And even going through this process, you may not end up with an AFA, but you'll learn a lot in that process and maybe find other ways to accomplish the same goals through our programs. But with that said, I want to give you guys some time back. Thanks you for hanging in there with us during this. I do want to make sure I acknowledge the team and the American Indian Employees Association for hosting these listening circles, and then the team of staff that volunteer, NRCS staff that volunteer to really get these schedules and arrange this time so that we can have these listening sessions. With that, I want to say Tabatni Anawayan. Thank you all for your time, and hope you have a good rest of your day.
And we just want to say that if there's any topics you guys would like to have us present on in the future, let us know.
Great. Thank you, David. Any topics, please feel free to throw those in the chat, or anything that's of need. Let this listening session team know about those, and we'll try to get that on, get another session established. Thank you all. Have a good day.